It's 1948. A man steps off a ship in Buenos Aires. He's holding a Red Cross passport. The name on it isn't his. The job reference letter in his pocket was signed by a Catholic bishop in Rome. You think the Catholic Church spent the years after World War II hunting down evil. It didn't. For some of the most wanted men on earth, it helped them disappear. Adolf Eichmann, the man who organized the logistics of the Holocaust, walked through Genoa with Vatican-linked paperwork. So did Joseph Mengele, the doctor who ran human experiments at Auschwitz. So did Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, who tortured prisoners with his own hands. These weren't lone forgers working in back alleys. They used a real network. Monasteries, church offices, international aid organizations, a pipeline that ran straight through the heart of the Catholic Church. So how does an institution built on confession and forgiveness end up running an escape hatch for mass murderers? And how much of it was deliberate? Let's start with the word itself. A rat line on a ship is a rope sailors climb to get up the rigging. After the war, people borrowed the term for something darker, an escape route, a path that got a fugitive from point A, usually defeat in Europe, to point B, usually freedom in South America. Here's the route, step by step. A wanted man, a former SS officer, a camp commandant, a collaborator, would travel south through Austria and into Italy. Italy mattered because it was chaotic. Borders were porous. Records were a mess. And Rome had something no other city had, an enormous, semi-independent network of churches, seminaries, and monasteries that asked very few questions. Once in Rome, the fugitive needed three things: a new identity, a travel document, and a visa. And remarkably, all three could be arranged within walking distance of the Vatican. The new identity often came from sympathetic clergy who could vouch for someone as a refugee, a displaced ethnic German, a persecuted Catholic, anything but what they actually were. The travel document came from the International Committee of the Red Cross, which issued passports to stateless refugees after the war. And the visa came from countries like Argentina, which were actively recruiting skilled Europeans. No questions asked. Put those three pieces together, and a man who'd helped run a death camp 18 months earlier could be sipping coffee in Buenos Aires under a brand new name. If this network had a single address, it was a building on the Via della Pace in Rome, the Austrian-German seminary run by a bishop named Alois Hudal. Hudal wasn't hiding what he believed. He'd written a book praising aspects of National Socialism years before the war ended. He saw communism as the real enemy of the church, and he saw fleeing Nazis, rightly or wrongly, as Catholic Europeans who needed protection from Soviet vengeance. So Hudal used his position. He wrote letters. He vouched for men he knew were SS officers. He helped arrange Red Cross documents under false names. By his own later admission, he helped thousands of people get out of Europe. And he wasn't shy about who some of those people were. Here's the part that should sit with you for a second. Hudal wasn't excommunicated. He wasn't quietly removed. He kept his position for years. Whatever the Vatican's official policy was, a bishop running an open-air smuggling operation for war criminals didn't end his career. Now, you might be thinking, okay, one corrupt bishop, acting alone, abusing his position, a bad apple. The church's hands are basically clean, except that's not what the broader picture shows. Refugee aid after World War II was genuinely one of the Catholic Church's biggest humanitarian operations. Millions of real refugees, Catholics, Jews, political prisoners, ordinary families with nowhere to go, passed through church-run relief networks to get new lives. That work was real, and most of the people running it had no idea they were standing next to a war criminal in line. But the systems built for genuine refugees, the vouching letters, the Red Cross documents, the resettlement visas, had almost no verification built in. And that gap was wide enough to drive a truck through. Some clergy exploited it knowingly, like Hudal. Others were almost certainly fooled by men who'd had years of practice lying about who they were. So here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't need a Vatican-wide conspiracy for this to work. You just need a system with no ID checks, a handful of ideologically sympathetic insiders, and tens of thousands of refugees moving through it at once. The fugitives didn't need the whole church to help them. They needed it to look the other way. Now zoom out, because the rat lines weren't a German story. They were a global one. Croatian Ustashi leader Ante Pavelić, a man whose regime ran concentration camps so brutal that even some German officers were disturbed by them, escaped through the exact same Rome pipeline, reportedly with help from a Croatian priest operating inside Vatican-affiliated institutions. French collaborators used it, Eastern European fascists used it, and then the United States got involved, for reasons that had nothing to do with mercy. By 1947, the war against Germany was over, but a new one, cold but very real, had already started against the Soviet Union. American intelligence agencies looked at some of these fleeing fugitives and saw something useful. Men with deep knowledge of Soviet territory, anti-communist credentials, and intelligence networks already in place. So in certain cases, U.S. intelligence didn't just tolerate the rat lines, it used them. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, was protected and relocated by American counterintelligence specifically because of his anti-communist value, before eventually ending up in Bolivia via the same Italian pipeline. Think about what that means. A network built, in part by a Catholic bishop's anti-communist sympathies, got quietly reinforced by a Western superpower's anti-communist strategy. Two completely different institutions, one church, one government, pointed in the same direction for different reasons, and the result was the same. Mass murderers walking free on a different continent. Here's the part that's almost harder to process than any of it. This wasn't a brief post-war loophole that closed in a year or two. Mengele lived freely in South America for over 3 decades, in Argentina, then Paraguay, then Brazil, before drowning in 1979, having never spent a day on trial. Eichmann lasted 15 years before Israeli agents finally found and captured him in a Buenos Aires suburb in 1960. 15 years. That's not an escape. That's a life. A normal one, a job, a routine, a name his neighbors used every day, while back in Europe the people he'd helped destroy were still being counted. And the Vatican's role in all of this stayed murky for decades. Partly because so much of it relied on individual clergy acting on their own initiative with little paper trail, and partly because nobody with the power to open the archives had much incentive to do so. It's only in recent years, as Vatican records from this period have slowly opened to historians, that the full shape of the network has started to come into focus. And even now, there are pieces nobody can fully reconstruct. There's something almost mundane about how all of this actually worked. No secret tunnels, no hidden codes, just paperwork. A letter here, a stamp there, a form filled out by someone who either didn't ask the right question or didn't want to know the answer. And that's the part worth sitting with. The machinery that let some of history's worst men disappear wasn't some elaborate conspiracy hidden in the shadows. It was built from the same small human compromises that move through any large institution every single day. A favor for a friend, a form rubber-stamped, a question left unasked because asking it would be inconvenient. Most of the people in that chain probably never saw the whole picture. They just saw their one small piece and signed it. That's usually how the worst things happen. Not in one terrible decision, but in 100 small ones, made by people who never had to look at where the line actually led. That's the story. Thanks for watching.